This is Oxted in Surrey. It's 22.3 miles south of London. In 2011, the Daily Telegraph newspaper listed it as one of the 20 richest towns in Britain. My dad was born here in 1946, and there's a mystery here, and it's to do with the church. This is Old Oxted, and it dates to the 13th century. And this is the Oxted that dates to the 19th century. So where is the ancient medieval Oxted church? It's here, in the new modern Oxted. Well, how did that happen? Why was the medieval village we now call Old Oxted built here, nearly a kilometre south from the old church? That's a question that's bugged a lot of people and me for many years.
Other people who've been bugged by this mystery are the good folks at St Mary's Church. On their website they say, "It is not clear why the church was built more than half a mile away from the original village of Oxted. There is no obvious evidence to support the suggestion of an earlier settlement around the church, which was wiped out in the Black Death, as occurred in some parishes. It does, however, seem quite probable that the circular mound on which it stands is an old pagan burial ground and place of worship." We begin in the Mesolithic period, and in Britain that dates from about 10,000 BC to about 4000 BC, and is the time following the Ice Age when the forests grew back and people recolonised the land in greater numbers. Scatters of flints have been found in the northern areas of Oxted, and the same is true for the Neolithic, when farming became widespread, and this period is from about 4000 BC to about 2500 BC. There have been discoveries of Neolithic items also in the northern areas of Oxted. But then we come to the Bronze Age, the first Metal Age, and that runs from about 2500 BC to about 800 BC. And this is when something new appears in the landscape here: barrows. These are circular burial mounds containing usually a single burial. Some were cremated, others were inhumations.
I'm now standing at the northern end of Oxted, and this is where things get very interesting, because running through this landscape here was once a line of Bronze Age barrows, starting in the east at Limsfield and running west to a place called Robin Grove Wood. So these Bronze Age barrows were placed more or less in a line through this landscape. Incredible. So that would include the mound that Oxted Church is built on, St Mary's, and also the mount a little bit further west, which was a Norman castle for a little while. And just for a bit of geography, those hills you can see up there in the distance, that's part of the North Downs. Running along that is what's known as the Pilgrim's Way, said to be a pilgrimage route for people going to Canterbury, though the consensus seems to be that that routeway up there and the various tracks and paths it takes is Neolithic, it's prehistoric, linking the Channel coast down from the English Channel up along through here and then further west to the great ritual monuments on Salisbury Plain, for example Stonehenge and Avebury.
If we plot out where these barrows ran, you can see they were a prominent feature in the landscape for anyone entering this narrowing area. They would quickly realise that this land was taken.
Bronze Age barrows are not just burial mounds. They are markers in the landscape to say that we are here. This is our land. So let's jump forward in time, through the Iron Age, past the Romans, and into the early Anglo-Saxon period, where Christianity was beginning to take hold here.
A church was built on one of those ancient Bronze Age barrows. Today we know that church as St Mary's, or just Oxted Church.
The advice given to priests back then seems to have been along the lines of, look, wherever you set up your first church, think of doing so at a place that is already held sacred to the local people. For example, somewhere like this, an old Bronze Age burial mound with maybe a pagan shrine on top. Because the locals are used to coming here, this is the place that is already sacred to them. So when you set up your church, set it up at these sort of places. Just move the old gods aside and put Christ in their place, and the locals will keep coming back here because it's an area and a location that's familiar to them.
According to Dr. Richard Muir, an expert in British landscape history, and of whom I am a great fan of, and even sent a fan letter to him many years ago, and yes, he did reply, In his book How to Read a Village, on page 112, he wrote, "A popular and very early church dedication was often to St Mary." He also says on page 115, "Solitary churches with topographically dramatic situations are often likely to have pagan precursors."
You see those two graves there? They're late Saxon graves. Clear evidence that there was Saxon activity up here, that this was originally a Saxon church. And the foundations of the tower are also of late Saxon origin. And in here in the tower, the floor of the tower is not level. It's not horizontal, it actually slopes down. It follows the contour of the mound. So now I'm heading down. You could roll Jaffas and marbles down here and out to the door there. And what does the name Oxted actually mean? It's an Old English word, and it's a compound of two words. The stead part means a place or an enclosure. In this case, the place of oaks. At this time, Oxted would have been a non-nucleated settlement, which means there was no centre to the settlement. Everything was scattered around. Farms and houses and cottages were here and there. The blacksmith may have been half a mile down the road. A weaver may have been much further over that way. It was all over the place.
We know that in the Domesday Book of 1086, compiled 20 years after the Norman conquest of 1066, that there was a church at Oxted. The first church on this site, though, would have been a mid to late Saxon church, made of wood, wattle and daub.
What about all the other barrows in this area? Well, most of them were ploughed out and destroyed. But there is one conspicuous mound not far from here, which could very well be a Bronze Age barrow, and it's actually not far from the church. I'm now walking along Sandy Lane, and to my right, over that way, is the mount. That's the what was possibly originally a Bronze Age barrow, later on became a medieval castle, small one, and probably not used all that much. I was just looking on maps on my phone, and apparently there is a public footpath running very close to the mount, and it should be just up ahead. I'm very excited to go and see this site. However, the ground here is very muddy, and of course I chose to wear light coloured pants today. Great. I know that the land, very large piece of land and a big beautiful house over there across the road, was owned by the Dodi Fayed's family. There's the mount. I've literally just seen it now. Good heavens. That's it there. It's known as the Mount, and it is known that there was once a very small medieval castle on the site. You see, nobody really knows why... I'll put this away. You see, there is no consensus of opinion as to when or how this mound of ground actually came to be. What I think, from my research, is that this was originally a Bronze Age barrow, just like the one that is believed that Oxted Church sits on, St Mary's Church. There was an archaeological excavation done here many, many years ago, and they did find flint flakes around the base of the mound. If this was just a medieval castle, why would you have worked flint, like little flint flakes from a nodule, from someone making stone tools? You probably wouldn't get that on a medieval build site. So I think that that was originally a Bronze Age barrow, and then later on it became a medieval castle. No one even really knows exactly when the medieval castle was put up. It may have been constructed just after the conquest by a fellow called Richard Tonbridge I think it's a little bit later. I think it was constructed during the Anarchy. So that could place it sometime round about 1135 to 1154. The Anarchy was a royal family squabble. It may have never been completely finished, and it doesn't seem that it was ever really put to use. The emergency of the Anarchy came and went, and then the castle almost straight away was redundant and not used anymore. Later on again, it became part of whoever the landowner was back then, some wealthy guy, landscaping the area, and I think there was flowers and other trees. Of course, if it was originally a Bronze Age barrow, it wouldn't have been quite that high. It has its height now mainly because of the medieval castle that was constructed on top.
The road just near the mount is known as Barrow Green Road, perhaps a very old name for the road before the barrow itself became a Norman castle. And what is interesting is that the first major work in stone at St Mary's Church also dates to the mid-12th century, coinciding with the construction of the castle at the mount. And additionally, a hospital was founded near the mount during this time, which only a couple of decades later morphed into an Augustinian priory. Clearly, the mid-12th century saw a building boom in the Oxted area. In about the mid-13th century, a new Oxted appeared, and confusingly, it is the one we today call Old Oxted.
In the 13th century, this was known as the King's Highway, a very busy road linking Guildford with Canterbury. Still is a very busy road today. So that's the A25 behind me. That's the bypass going off in that direction. But you can see up that way, the road heading up to Old Oxted. That's where the road originally went. That's the old medieval road up there. The road provided a link to markets and trade and money. So it made perfect sense to build the new Oxted on this road. It's ironic that we now call it Old Oxted.
For the next 600 years or so, this was Oxted, a small village straddling the increasingly busy east-west road. And on Sundays, the residents had to traipse up the new country laneway, soon to be called Church Lane, to get to the ancient St Mary's Church for services.
At the end of the 13th century, there is the first mention of the Hall of the Manor. The manor house was built right next to the church. This is an old tradition where the local lord would build his house as close to the church as possible. That way he didn't have to walk every Sunday to get to it. He could see salvation right outside his bedroom window. That building just over there behind me, that is the site of where the old medieval manor house was. And now we come to the year 1884, and something arrives that forever changes Oxted. It's the railways.
And what does a railway line bring? Jobs, of course, money, opportunity, and people can commute. Very quickly, another new Oxted began to appear. This one centred on the train station and right back at the place where the Anglo-Saxon non-nucleated Oxted first began. It just so happens that, via a twist of fate, Oxted train station was built only about 180 metres from the old St Mary's Church. That's why the medieval church today is in the modern new town of Oxted. The mystery has been solved.
Oxted is a very good example of how English villages can shift around the landscape. We look at villages and we think that they're never changing, that they're always going to be here the way they are. But they don't. They respond to new technologies, to trade, to plague and wars. They grow and expand or shrink or disappear sometimes. Other times, in the case of Oxted, they shift around the landscape. English villages are dynamic places because they're always reflecting what's going on in the country. They evolve very slowly, but they do evolve to meet those changing needs. Something like that. Thanks very much for watching the video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please consider hitting that like and the subscribe button, and I'll see you again soon.